We'll welcome in Michael McAllister, his new site, nationoforange.com, SU basketball news, recruiting news, and opinion as well. Love the site. Again, it's nationoforange.com. Michael McAllister is our guest. Michael, it's good to have you on, man. How you doing?
Thanks, Chris. I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. He had certainly gave us plenty to talk about over the weekend. We have been talking with callers all day. Steve and I debated it. What you take out of the second half of that game, I think there's two ways you look at it. They blew a huge lead against Marquette, or they had the question answered. What do they do in crunch time? They went to Deion Waiters, they went to Chris Joseph, and those guys came through. What did you see from the second half of that game on Saturday?
I tend to look at it more from the, they got punched in the mouth by a good team, and a team that beat them twice last year, playing the type of physical style that you saw in the second half. And I tend to take more from it that Syracuse met that challenge and responded to it when they needed to make some plays. And, one of the things that some of the national media has said about Syracuse that's one of their downfalls is that who's their go-to guy when it comes to crunch time. And anyone that watched that game, which, Ron Morris has already seen us one time, so he obviously didn't watch it, but anyone else that watched the game could see we've got several playmakers. Scoop has shown in previous years he can make plays down the stretch of games. He did that in the Florida game. Chris Joseph and Deion Waiters both showed that they can make clutch plays in the game Saturday. So, I think they answered that bell pretty well, and I think that should maybe silence some of those critics going forward.
You cover the recruiting side of this basketball team too. I think it's interesting. You see McDonald's All-Americans go to top 5 teams, and in a lot of cases they play right away, and it's a rotation of one and done, maybe 2 years and done, like you see at Kentucky or North Carolina. I think you'll see a couple of those guys this year. The Syracuse team is kind of a mixture. They'll get the occasional local guy that stays all 4 years. They'll get the highly touted recruit that will stay 3 or 4 years, and then they'll mix in some of those 1 year, 2 year and done type of guys as well. It's a little bit different when you look at like a Michael Carter-Williams or Raheem Christmas playing, 2 minutes or 4 minutes or not getting into a game at all and waiting their turn at an elite program like this when they're McDonald's All-Americans. When you compare it to the other schools, I know, you guys on your Coast to Coast Hoops, network cover all the recruiting from all the different schools. It's kind of different the way they do things here. It's not come in and play right away unless the junior or senior kind of hands the job over to you. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's always been a little bit different here. I mean, you think about how many teams play 2-3 zone like we do exclusively. It doesn't happen. So obviously that's a little bit different. And so Boeheim is recruiting a little bit different of a type of player. He's looking for, the forwards, maybe not to be the big, bulky type of forwards, but to be more the long, lean, athletic, quicker type of guys. And, I think you look at Kentucky and then you look at what Calipari's doing, and he brings in a lot of 5-star All-American type of guys. And when they get there, they have a lot of talent, no doubt. But I think you need some of those 3- and 4-year type of guys to round out your team, because when you get to tournament time, that experience, there's nothing like it. And when you don't have that on your team, you get into pressure-packed situations, and then the teams start to fold. And I think that's what you've seen with Kentucky a couple of years ago when they had John Wall and they lost to West Virginia in the Dome. You see that, last year with the Kentucky team. So Syracuse does recruit a little bit differently, but at the same time, they're not getting scrubs. They're getting very talented players, and I think the players that come in know the way the system works here. Boeheim plays the best players, but he does give a little more precedence to the upperclassmen, and so they seem to be okay waiting for their turn to play. There's been no complaints from Michael Carter-Williams. Trevor Cooney, obviously, they want to play, but they understand the way things are. Trevor Cooney's redshirting, and from all reports, he's working his butt off in practice. He's getting better, and they're not issues. So I think, yes, they're recruiting the McDonald's All-Americans, but at the same time, they're recruiting guys that are going to know, listen, it's about the team, and if you're going to be all about yourself, then maybe Syracuse isn't the place for you. But if you're patient and you stick it out, you're going to be a better player by the time you leave Syracuse.
Michael McAllister is with us here on Upon Further Review. Fairly new site, nationoforange.com. Check it out. Your source for Syracuse basketball and recruiting news. You can also follow him on Twitter at Nation of Orange. Again, Michael McAllister, our guest here on ESPN Radio 97.7, 100.1. We were comparing it to the, perfect game analogy. At some point around the 6th or 7th inning, you start to notice, and you take note that there are all zeros on the scoreboard, runs, hits, errors. This team's 17-0. They haven't gone through the meat of the Big East yet. Where's your 6th or 7th inning for this team where you start to say, wow, this team still hasn't lost?
Well, I think when you get to the Georgetown game, that's a good spot to look at it. There's a couple of games coming up, with the Villanova game, obviously, on Wednesday, Cincinnati and Notre Dame. They're road games. Syracuse is better than those teams. There's no question about that. If you play them on a neutral court, if you play them in the Dome, I don't think anyone would worry about those games. But because they're on the road, because Villanova has a history of playing well against Syracuse, those type of games can be a little bit concerning, but the bottom line is if Syracuse plays their game and doesn't shoot themselves in the foot, they should be undefeated going into the Georgetown game at home. Then you're playing Georgetown, it's a rivalry game, anything could happen, but when you get to that game, if you get through that game and start getting into your 2 games against Louisville and Connecticut, it's absolutely going to be there that people are going to start saying, well, could this team go undefeated? But especially if you get through the road games at Louisville and at Connecticut, then people are really going to start to say, wow, this team really could go undefeated. The only downside to that is there's a lot of pressure that goes along with that, but I think if Syracuse has ever had a team that could take that pressure and really have it not affect their play on the court, it's this team. The mental makeup of this team is maybe the best I've ever seen them have, and they all seem to love playing together. They all seem to get up for every single game regardless of the opponent. I haven't seen them slack off in any game or have a down type of a performance, which sometimes can happen against lesser opponents. So that type of a thing doesn't really worry me. But going undefeated in the regular season it's not impossible. You've seen enough weird things in sports happen to know it's not impossible, but it's definitely a unlikely scenario. But once you get up to that Georgetown game, I think that's the appropriate time to start talking about it.
See, I'm with you. I think this 2 years ago, I loved the team's chemistry. I thought it was as good, as this one is. But I also thought that, you only had 7 players on that team, and no one was really competing for playing time on that team. They had a set rotation, and Scoop and Chris would come off the bench, and that team could get caught in a trap game, I thought, and almost did a couple of times against DePaul where they won by 2. This team, I think it's so competitive to get playing time, and every time James Sutherland steps on the floor, he wants to prove that he deserves 20, 25 minutes a game, or, likewise for CJ Fair or Baikita or any of the guys. I think you're right. I mean, I'd be shocked if this team had a game where they just didn't show up against one of the lesser teams in the Big East.
I completely agree with you, but the other thing, too, is you got to imagine how competitive the practices are. I mean, I know there's been debate between fans and talk radio hosts that Syracuse's second 5 could be a top 25 team. Well, the first 5 and second 5 are playing against each other in practice all the time. So you've got 2 top 25 teams playing each other in practice every day. And it only helps Michael Carter-Williams to go against Scoop and Brandon Trish. It only helps Dion Waiters to have to try to get by Brandon Trish every day in practice. It only helps CJ Fair to have to deal with Chris Joseph's length every day and try to get rebounds over Fab Melo. So those type of things, you think about the teams they're playing in practice are going to be 95% of the time better than whoever they're playing in the next game. And that's only going to help keep the intensity up. It's only going to help the team stay focused. So you just don't see any spot before that Georgetown game, and then the schedule gets obviously very, very difficult. A spot where unless they completely don't show up, which, as you said, you just can't see this team doing, there's not really a spot where they can lose unless you run into a team where a guy just goes like 8 for 9 from downtown or something.
Michael McAllister is here, news.com. Before we let you go, Michael, any notable developments over the last recent period of time on recruiting for either next year's class or the year after?
Nothing major. There's a few guys. several guys that Syracuse is in on that are in the top of their class. They're in on Nerlens Noel, who's the prize of the 2013 class. He's the number one guy. They're also looking at B.J. Anya, who we have an interview with up on the site right now. He's the fifth-rated center in the class. Other than that, there's not really anything major. A lot of guys are taking their time for next year's class, in the class of 2014. But Syracuse is in on a lot of 4- or 5-star McDonald's All-American type recruits. The one good thing I can say is the whole Bernie Fine situation. I know we haven't heard anything about that in a while, but it does not seem to have affected recruiting whatsoever. The kids are not concerned about it. They don't talk about it. They still look at Syracuse as one of the spots that they're the most interested in and want to go, and one of the places that would be the best fits for them. So there's no fallout from that, and recruiting looks to be great going forward. Even the guys, you could say are quote-unquote second-tier recruits, if Syracuse missed out on a couple of the star guys, are still guys that are very, very talented and would come here and do very well. So the recruiting for Syracuse, the future looks absolutely bright, and even when Boeheim leaves and Mike Hopkins takes over, I don't see any fallout there either.
The website is nationoforange.com. You can follow him on Twitter, @nationoforange. It's Michael McAllister. Good stuff, man. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Chris.